Good evening, welcome to another Hot Topic where we discuss the issues affecting East Yorkshire and Northern Lincolnshire. Since 2010, England's fire brigades have suffered severe cuts in their income from central government. The National Audit Office found the responsible department, the Department for Communities and Local Government, has reduced funding for fire and rescue authorities by between 26 and 39%. Humberside Fire and Rescue Service must save over £1 million in the year 2016 to 17, and the Humberside Fire Authority is looking into ways how these savings can best be achieved. But what does this mean for the future of the fire service? Will it pose a risk to the communities it serves? And how much more expensive will it be for local taxpayers? I'll be discussing this with my guest tonight, Deputy Chief Fire Officer for Humberside Fire and Rescue Service, Chris Blaxall, and retired firefighter with 30 years' experience, Glenn Ramsden. Welcome to Hot Topic. I'm Hugh Riches. Gentlemen, thank you both for coming in.
Hello.
I suppose Hot Topic, this is a particularly appropriate title for this programme. Chris, just explain what these cuts have meant over the last 5 years or so, 5 or 6 years or so. Why have these cuts from central government been coming in and what have they meant for your service?
Okay, for Humberside Fire and Rescue Service, we actually lost 27% of our funding from government already, and obviously we're anticipating some significant savings over the next few years as well. So we've actually lost about 12, or we predict by 2019-20, we'll have lost about £12 million of our funding from central government. We've made about £9 million worth of savings already, and we've got a way to go. We've generated some income in terms of some local tax bases that have gone up a bit. But actually the taxpayers of the Humber area have been paying the same amount for 5 or 6 years now. We've not actually put that up for independent households. That's gone up slightly this year. The authorities agreed to put that up by 1.25%. That's not an awful lot in terms of a monthly payment for people, but it gives us a bit more money financially. But we're still going to have to make around about £2.2 million worth of savings by 2019-20.
And Glenn, you're as an experienced firefighter who has to deal with cuts like this. You know what cuts have done in the past to fire and rescue services. That's a big cut to make, isn't it?
It is, it's a huge cut, and I take my hat off to these guys really having to manage it. As a layperson, I think the easiest thing to do is sit at central government saying, you cut this, you cut this, you cut this. To actually be the person that has to manage that and still perform properly, or still have your service operationally performing properly, is a huge task. And how people are doing it nowadays, I just don't know.
Well, you first joined the fire service back in the 1970s.
That's right.
And I guess that was probably just before there was that great famous late 1970s firemen's strike, which lasted for a long time. You'll remember the green goddesses on the streets.
That's right.
Well, not all of us do, but some of us who are of a certain age. What does cuts like this, what sort of effect does it have on the morale of the firefighters?
It has a terrible effect on morale, on the station as well, and it's a team-driven job, and you need that team spirit to go through, and it must be, again, not just managing the cuts financially, how are you going to do it operationally, managing the morale of those people and keeping that spirit high is almost impossible on the station. But cuts, redesigning the service, call it what you will, has been going on since I joined in '79. So the first thing that I encountered was a change in my post from Hull to Immingham because the fireboat was taken out of service. So these things are not new, and the fire brigade, especially Humberside, the effect that, or the experience I have, is that they've realigned themselves to improve the service all the way along, but cuts of this scale are the new thing. And how people are going to manage major emergencies in the future, I've not got a clue.
Well, Chris, I mean, that's the question, I suppose. How are you going to manage major emergencies or any other sort of emergencies in the future? What are the practical consequences going to be of this loss of money?
I mean, in terms of the practical consequences that we've seen so far, we've certainly got a reduced number of fire engines, so that resilience for large incidents is reduced. We've been consulting quite recently on some potential changes in Immingham and East Riding, in Market Wheaton, Brough, Withensea and Hornsey. And those are savings that we can make and still achieve our performance standards. So we do have some quite rigorous performance standards in Humberside, and they're actually set by the Fire Authority, and they hold myself and the Chief to account for achieving those response standards. And we're achieving them at the moment, and all the changes we'll make will still be able to achieve those. I think the difference is going to be for large-scale incidents going on. we need to make sure we've got as many fire engines as possible so we're resilient.
Let me just clarify the location of the responsibilities here. There's the Fire Authority and there's the Fire and Rescue Service itself. They're two separate things, and the Fire and Rescue Service, as it were, reports to the Fire Authority?
Yes, that's a fair way of putting it. So the Fire Authority is made up of the 4 local authorities in the Humber area, so Hull, East Riding, North East Lincolnshire and North Lincolnshire. And councillors from those authorities come together and form the Fire Authority. So there's 22 elected members form the Fire Authority, and we report to them, yeah.
And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You've just finished a consultation process, and the possibilities, the most direct possibilities of savings are, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I may press you, is either losing one of the 2 fire stations in Immingham, which would also mean losing 1 fire engine, 1 appliance, or the possibilities of losing an engine from Market Weighton or Brough or from Hornsey or from Withensea. Where are we with those consultations now?
Well, I'll just correct you slightly on the Immingham options, because actually we won't close a fire station in Immingham. So there's currently you've got 3 fire engines in Immingham, and they're spread between 2 stations. We've got 2 at one and 1 at the other, and both of the options that we're looking at reduce the overall number of fire engines in Immingham to 2. So we could do that by splitting them up between the 2 stations. One of the options we've looked at is effectively, we've called it merging the stations, but in actual fact we're still going to maintain both of those fire stations as operationally available. They will effectively, the 2 fire engines might start and finish their shift together, but then we'll split them up between the 2 stations as we need to during the day and evening. We do that successfully in Grimsby already, so all the engines at Grimsby start and finish the shift at Peaks Lane, but during the night time, for example, there's a fire engine covering in the Cromwell Road area as well. So we expect we'll do the same with that. So neither of the options will see a fire station in Immingham close, but it will see the overall number of fire engines drop from 3 to 2.
Let me just clarify something you said a moment ago, that these cuts, the consequence is likely to be that it's going to limit your capacity to respond to major incidents.
Well, we've got some performance standards in the service that are extremely difficult to achieve, but we perform against them very well. So we've got set standards for 8, 12 and 20 minutes for incidents that we'll attend, and we have to achieve 90% of that performance. We're actually achieving about 98% at the moment. And we still have a performance standard where we can get 10 fire engines anywhere in our area within 40 minutes for a larger incident. None of these changes will affect that. When it gets more challenging is when you have 2 or 3 large incidents going on at the same time, but that's very, very rare.
But so are you suggesting that these cuts won't be affecting the domestic fire service, that not the industrial or the port or the infrastructure or the very large incidents, but I don't mean the kitchen pots and pans catching fire on the stove fires, but a domestic house fire, or people needing to be rescued from a dangerous situation, that won't particularly be affected by these?
We'll still be able to achieve our response standard. So in actual fact, we looked at an awful lot of potential options that could be consulted on, and the ones we've consulted on are one of the ones that have got the least impact on the ability to get 1 fire engine to an incident, so our first fire engine response standard. Some of these have actually got a predicted impact of 0 on that. We don't expect that I'll see any change at all. Where you will start to see a difference, and I think this is what the authority will be considering when they make the decisions, is in the Immingham area, of course, that will still leave us 2 fire engines in Immingham. Now, our normal response to a house fire or to a road traffic collision will be to 2 fire engines, because we need 9 firefighters to safely deal with those incidents. That'll be more challenging in some of the potential options in East Riding, because we'll still be able to get a fire engine there. So all the options in East Riding, we've got 2 fire engines in those towns. Potentially that drops to 1. So we'll still be able to get that 1 fire engine there as quick as before, but the backup will come from a different area. So there'll be effect on how quickly we can get the second engine there.
Will there be effect on the number of firefighters in total? Will there be job losses?
There will be certainly a reduction in the number of firefighter posts. If the Immingham proposal goes through, that's full-time firefighters, because at Immingham we crew that 24/7. At the other stations there'll be a reduction in the part-time, the on-call firefighters, that we use as those stations, yeah.
And how will those reductions be? Would it be possible to do that by natural wastage, as it were, by people retiring, or will there be compulsory redundancies?
Yeah, I never really like the term natural wastage.
Well, forgive me, I'm sorry.
But you're right. I think it's been really important for us and the Fire Authority that if we do make any changes, we can implement them without having to make any compulsory redundancies. We've managed to do that so far, and actually none of these options that are on the table now mean we'll have to consider compulsory redundancies. But we're in a position now actually where we've had quite a lot of people retire from the service already, and in fact, for example, the Immingham option, if that wasn't made, we'd need to start thinking about recruiting. Even if it is, we'll be recruiting relatively soon.
We'll have to stop you there for a moment. We'll come back and talk about those major incidents in a moment. Glenn, please join us again in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. Still with me in the studio, my guests, Deputy Chief Fire Officer of Humberside Fire and Rescue Service, Chris Blaxall, and retired and extremely experienced firefighter, Glenn Ramsden. We were just talking about the distinction between the major incidents and the minor incidents and the different ways in which those are covered. Glenn, the Immingham fire stations especially, that's one of the largest and busiest ports in England, and that has a particular necessity for firefighting when enormous amounts of combustible material might be available. Is it wise to cut down on the number of fire engines available?
What is difficult to understand for the layperson is that there are a lot of fire brigades in Immingham. So the refineries have their own services. Some in my day, Fisons and ICI all had their own services as well, because they were kind of covering their own risk. They were bringing this risk into town, if you want. They had to deal with the first stage of it themselves, and with the local authority fire brigade as backup. So cuts are never good, but there's always been you could always realign things to make them work more effectively, and I've seen that over my service. Having said that, the degree of cuts, like Chris just said, is now a bit concerning. And okay, the brigade are keeping the head above water. I would hate to think what would happen if it goes one step further. And I don't just mean that for Humberside Fire and Rescue or Humberside Police, I mean that nationally. And I know that the chiefs and the deputies are in a position where they can't really say, I can no longer deal with a major emergency if it happens. And that, I think, is going to be a situation that we'll get to soon. And just to reiterate what I said earlier on, it must be easy to sit in central government saying you've got to cut 80 million or whatever they cut on the different services. But being the guy that has to account for it when it all goes wrong because that service couldn't deal with it, that's going to be a different kettle of fish, and I wouldn't like to see that happen, really.
Well, how confident are you, Chris? I mean, these sort of private fire services, as it were, that the big industries, the big shippers, and the big factories might have on site. Is that possibly the future, that other industries, other businesses will be sorting out their own fire protection policies and not relying on the fire and rescue service?
Well, I think even though those organisations do have some independent firefighting resources on site, they still rely on us to back them up. So they might get a quick response from people who understand the site very well. But in actual fact, from a large incident, it'll still be calling on Humberside Fire and Rescue Services resources to deal with the incidents as well.
And I could just go back to what you were saying in that first part there about the number of appliances, number of fire engines, and the number of firefighters to, say, a road traffic accident. Yeah. And traditionally, up to now, you've required 9 firefighters and 2 fire engines. I've watched all these demonstrations of how people are rescued and the jaws of death and the jaws of life, rather, and all those things, and in making educational films to try to avoid drunken driving and get especially young people to drive more carefully. It's terrifying, and it's skilled, difficult, intense, high energy work, and under great pressure to save a life. As soon as you get that person out of the wreckage, then the sooner you can get them to a hospital and get them mended again. Surely having fewer than 9 firefighters and fewer than 2 fire engines there is going to make a difference to that.
Well, I think it's certainly, if you can get the resources there quickly, you can deal with the incident quickly. Absolutely.
Even with fewer people.
With fewer people, you can still do something. You can still make the incident a lot safer. But absolutely, that's why we've got the standards there. So we've got the standards to get a first fire engine there on 90% of occasions within our time periods, and a second fire engine actually there within 5 minutes of the first. It's more difficult in some of the rural areas. It's more difficult, particularly with road traffic collisions that might happen on a very remote road somewhere. It's more difficult to achieve. But in actual fact, on average, bearing in mind the service area is quite rural in some areas, on average we achieve getting a first fire engine to those incidents on less than 9 minutes on average, and just over 6 minutes to house fires. So we're still achieving very well.
It almost sounds as if these cuts are still allowing you to perform so brilliantly and provide such a fantastic service, it sounds as if before these cuts maybe you didn't need the money in the first place, and you've been a bit profligate.
I certainly wouldn't say that at all, and I think
I didn't think you would.
And I think it's fair to say that if we didn't have the financial challenges we've got at the moment, actually I wouldn't be suggesting that we removed any of the fire engines, because what we do need is a good geographical spread of fire cover. We've worked really well over the last few years to reduce the number of fires, and of course the reduction in the number of fires means that the fire engines are more available and that it's easier to get them quickly to other incidents. But absolutely we need that geographical spread. Well,
I'll be coming to that, the reduction in the number of fires, but I do just want to put to you the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor, Sir Ken Knight, suggests that further, this is a couple of years old now, yes, but he was in 2013 was suggesting that further savings are necessary, not just what you're already enduring, but that the service must be pared back even further. Glenn was saying that that's always been the case from his whole experience. How do you deal with that? I mean, how much more can you cut?
I think in actual fact the savings that were suggested in that report have actually been achieved already nationally. So you're right, there were some suggestions in that report about how, one of the things, for example, he talked about was increasing the number of retained firefighters or on-call firefighters who do an incredibly good job in some of the rural communities where we don't have full-time firefighters, and they'll respond to the stations. That was one of the suggestions. In actual fact, we use them regularly right across the service area, so I think that's something we're doing, and provide a fantastic resource very, very cost effectively.
Glenn, can I just ask you to explain that a little deeper? What are retained firefighters, and what is their relationship with the full-time force?
Over my years of service, the retained firefighters' role has changed phenomenally. And almost when I joined, they were the second-class citizens, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, that's just the way they were at the time. And then there was parity with training and all the rest of the stuff that goes with it, because they received less training than whole-time firefighters at the time. That's very, very different now, and everybody's trained to the same standard. And as Chris said, the people in the more rural areas, so you might see a fire station out in the countryside that doesn't appear to have anybody there. They work on a pager system, so when they get a fire call, they respond to the station, the same as the lifeboat guys and the mountain rescue guys and all the rest of it, and take their fire engine or fire engines to a job and do absolutely the same job that the whole-time firefighters do. And often, they will find themselves coming into the towns and cities as well. So if people are busy in Grimsby, it may be that a retained fire engine would come in to cover Grimsby area or Hull or any of the others as well. And they do an excellent job, but it is over and above what they're doing on full-time jobs as well. So there's a problem, with availability. They're not always available, and it's a massive problem to manage. But they've got so much pride in what they do. They try and keep those appliances in service as best they can all the time, and they do a fantastic job. It's a thankless job sometimes with a lot of hours to do it really well.
And they're paid only, about 10% of the whole time of the full-time?
I don't know what the pay is actually. I've never.
Chris can probably
it'd be broadly that. It depends how many calls they go into and what the station profile is, but it's certainly a lot more cost efficient. Yeah.
Well, the fact is, though, if you've got these wonderful people, the retained firefighters, they're not much good if they don't have a fire engine there. I take it. So you need no firefighter the firefighter is only as good as the equipment that he or she has. Mm-hmm. So if you have fewer fire engines, you can have as many retained firefighters as you like, and it doesn't really improve or enhance the service. Have I got the wrong end of the stick?
No. If we've got fewer fire engines on the retained on the on-call stations, we'll need less firefighters, and those where the savings can be made. But the savings at those on-call stations in the East Riding, for example, are much less than the savings we can make by the change in Immingham.
Is it possible just to have a greater proportion of the service provided by retained firefighters rather than by the full-timers?
Well, we need a mixed coverage, I think. As Glenn said, it's difficult for a retained firefighter to be available all the time, and in some of our high risk areas, we've got a response standard to get a fire engine there within 8 minutes. Well, the retained firefighters will generally respond within 5 minutes, so clearly it leaves you not a long area that you can cover in that other 3 minutes. So in some areas we absolutely need whole-time firefighters, but we have actually changed from whole-time to retained firefighters where we can. So Goole is an example where we changed a whole-time engine to a retained engine, and it still provides an excellent service. They do an incredibly good service, but as Glenn said, they're doing that over and above their normal jobs. So we need more of them to make sure they can be available to actually cover.
Feel free to use this as a recruitment drive. If people would like to join, I presume they just contact the Humberside Fire and Rescue Service.
Well, when we do have vacancies at those stations, we actively recruit in those areas, and obviously it's a very tight area because we need people who either live or work within 5 minutes of the station.
Glenn, forgive me for using you as a sort of a historical example here, but the fact is that there are fewer fires nowadays because of various safety features. There were, in the last 5 years, 16,000 calls, this is in the Humberside area, 16,000 calls down to about 9,000 calls, and 40% of those are false alarms. How irritated do you get when you find yourself booting up to go out on a shout and there's just somebody's dropped a sparkler in a bucket?
It's still a fire call at the end of the day. The malicious false alarms, they are frustrating and very, very dangerous. They create dangerous situations from minute one when you're trying to get on the fire engine and get dressed, driving through the traffic obviously and get there, and it's quite frustrating. I understand over the years that number of calls has plummeted on malicious false alarms. Interesting what you say about the reduction in calls though, because back in 1990 I was one of the pioneers of the school education programme for Humberside Fire and Rescue, and that was always designed as a long-term programme.
Well, forgive me, Glenn, to interrupt again, but we'll talk about the importance of education as well as we come on. Please join me again in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. Still with me in the studio, my guest, Deputy Chief Fire Officer of Humberside Fire and Rescue Service, Chris Blaxall, and retired firefighter Glenn Ramsden, talking about the role of the Fire and Rescue Service and the role of the cuts from central government spending. Glenn, forgive me, I interrupted you. We were just talking about education and its role in reducing the number of incidents that require fire and rescue. Well, you were talking about how education has helped with that.
Back in 1990, Humberside Fire and Rescue, and they were one of the first in the country to do this, was pioneering a school education programme which was basically a long-term programme aimed at when those children we educated became adults. And we taught at the time 9 to 11-year-olds, and we did the full county, which was Humberside, it was Humberside own county council then. We did all the schools in the area constantly, and that school, some form of that school education programme I understand still carries on now, and the benefits to the brigade and the safety of the public, I suppose that's more important, have been huge, in that when those people actually did become householders, parents and adults, they already had a fire safety education background that they knew about, and they'd been in various situations with us that stuck with them for life, and we actually called it a lesson for life. And I strongly believe the reduction in house fires now in this area has been based on the work that those people have done in the past. So long term, and a garbled way of going about it from me, I do apologise, but so the school education programme, I feel, has reduced the number of fire calls to property fires in the Humberside area.
Well, Chris, would you agree with that? Is there something more to it as well as education? Education crucial, of course.
Yes, I would agree with that, is the short answer. It's certainly something we've continued to do, and Glenn's absolutely right. I think with the preventative work you do, you don't see an immediate effect, or it's very unusual to see immediate effect. What you tend to see is an effect further down the line when people understand the risks of fire more. School education is something we do an awful lot with. We do an awful lot of road safety education, for example, at the moment. Whilst I've been talking about fire engines before, I'm responsible for all of our service delivery, so I'm also responsible for all of our preventative work and all of our business safety work as well. And to me, it's really important we keep a balance of those things. So it'd be very easy to say, make huge savings in our preventative work, for example, so we could keep all the fire engines available. But actually it's a balance. If we don't get our preventative work right, we'll get too many fires. It'll make it more difficult for the operational firefighters to respond. So it's a real balance between those two things for me.
Can I just, this is complete speculation, but the reduction in the number of fires might be something to do with a change in materials from which buildings are constructed, as one, and secondly, the fact that people don't smoke cigarettes as much as they used to. Has that made a difference?
There's something in that. Certainly smoking's helped. I think people often say, because we've reduced probably by about 50% alcohols over the last 10 years, which is phenomenal, really, and I think most public sector organisations will be delighted if they could achieve that as well.
So you've reduced 50%?
About 50% in the last 10 years, certainly.
Really?
So for example, arson, I think in 2004-05 was probably over 7,000 a year and is less than 2,000 now. So I've had some significant impacts in that. But that's actually been firefighters on the fire engines doing a lot of preventative work as well, and of course the safety advocates we employ as well. So yeah, it's been a phenomenal effect.
Well, it's absolutely shocking that there are still 2,000 incidents of arson just in the Humberside area. But if the demand for fire and rescue services has gone down by 50% in the last 10 years, somebody sitting in Whitehall might be thinking, well, in that case, the money that it needs might need to go down by 50%. So are you not making a rod for your own back with this success?
I think that would be a very simplistic view, if that was the view that
many of my views are.
But I do have to say that we've of course reduced our budget massively. We talked earlier about the huge budget reductions that we've got from central government anyway. But I still think there's that balance to work. So you're right. There's difference in building materials. More people have got smoke alarms, for example. That still doesn't stop you having a fire. And I think at the moment there's a danger that we might plateau at that low level. So actually, in fact, in the last quarter we've seen arson go up a little bit. So we need to just keep an eye on that preventative work as well.
I want to emphasise, I mean, I, as a fan of Trumpton, and I would use the phrase fire brigade, and I noticed it Glenn did a little earlier, but it's not a fire brigade, it's a fire and rescue service. And so that rescue side of the operations is extremely important. We've talked about road traffic accidents and things like that as well, and other incidents. But it is expensive, and some of those incidents are trivial, and it might seem mean-minded not to have a fire brigade there to get the little cat down from the top of a tree. I don't think it is, because but I'm fond of cats, but other people paying their taxes might think that's not necessarily a fine use of their funds. Did you find yourself getting a little frustrated by some of the more trivial operations that you found yourself going on?
No, I didn't. My first station officer when I was at Immingham, one of the first things I got taught was, when we get a call, you're the only person that can help that person that's called you. So that you are the single most important thing in their lives. They've called you because that's the only thing available in their mind to help you. And we've come across all sorts of trivial things. And when we've got there, it's been nothing but it's been somebody that's been in trouble themselves and all the rest of it. And even in the past, we've offered the sort of caring service. We've seen that person's in trouble. They understand why they've called. The frustrating ones are, like I mentioned earlier on, the malicious false alarms which have dropped, and like Chris alluded to, arson, which is dropping phenomenally, which is a great thing. But all the rest, I think not just every firefighter, every emergency service worker understands that you're going to go to something that probably afterwards you'll probably discuss between yourselves over a cup of tea and think that was a bit trivial. But at the end of the day, you were the only people that could help at the time, so it's part of the role, I understand, really.
Well, in that case, I'm going to put my hat on as the horrible person, Chris, and ask how much, I don't know how one would define a trivial incident or an incident that didn't really require the professional and heroic services of the Fire and Rescue Service, but how much of your budget would you estimate is spent on foolish little things?
To be fair, I think it's impossible for me now to just start estimating figures in terms of those things. Glenn's right, malicious false alarms are incredibly dangerous. If someone's going to ring up and say there's a fire and there isn't, then we've got the danger of having the crew on the road and the danger that they're not available for other incidents. But when it comes to animal rescues, we don't get many calls to cats up trees being the obvious example. Neither have I ever seen a cat skeleton up a tree.
A cultural cliche, isn't it?
It is.
Skeletons up trees.
Well, I've never seen a cat skeleton up a tree, so generally speaking, they come down. But what I would say is we also turn out to lots of incidents where animals are in distress, particularly in the water. And actually, my view is it's probably right that we go to those, because otherwise the owner would go in there. So if someone's trying to go in there and rescue the dog, by the time we get called to a dog trapped in the water, chances are when we get there might be someone in there trying to rescue it as well. So as Glenn said, I think we're the last port of call. I think once you've got the fire and rescue service, if we're not going to attend, who is? There's an awful lot of things we've got no statutory duty to attend, but where would you stop? Flooding, for example. Got no statutory duty to attend flooding, and I'm sure that you wouldn't suggest we didn't do that. It's right we do it, and I think it's right we continue.
I think you've had a busy few years in this region in terms of flooding as well. I want to talk about just that the wide range of things you do, rescue and fire, and the training and the terms of work that firemen go through. I would imagine it's changed a little bit since the 1970s, Glenn, but how long does it take to train, and how expensive is it to train a firefighter? Well, perhaps you can give a range over the years.
Initially in my day, I think we did 3 months initial training at a training school, at a training centre, before we were put on station, and then you went through a probationary period, and you had to achieve certain levels doing certain things during the probationary period before you became, if you want, a time-served firefighter.
So you think of it as an apprenticeship, do you? Use
exactly,
that phrase, time-served.
And it was, and the knowledge you gained from it was incredible, and not just squirting water, and building construction and all sorts of other things, first aid and things like that. The knowledge you got from it was second to none, and it still is nowadays. It's more focused nowadays, because sometimes you could sit there thinking, why am I learning this? Well, it's been refined a bit more since then.
Well, Chris, I mean, it's a modern training. It involves a great deal more of the medical side of things.
Yeah, certainly. The training is still very similar, actual fact, in terms of the length of time. Or we tend to reduce it into modules and do it separately. But you're right. I think there's significant change, certainly for Humberside Fire and Rescue Service, is the amount of medical incidents we're attending as well. So we've started. We talked about retained fire stations and the on-call firefighters there. In actual fact, we've added to the capability of a lot of those fire stations and put a medical response vehicle on there as well. So those fire stations, the firefighters there are receiving an enhanced medical training, so they're able to deal with cardiac arrests, strokes, severe breathing difficulties, and they're actually getting mobilised on behalf of the ambulance services at both sides of the Humber, so Yorkshire Ambulance Service and East Midlands Ambulance Service. Actually, we're doing that. It's not costing the public anymore. In actual fact, we recover any costs from the ambulance service, but it's using the firefighters who've got those extremely good skills, particularly in those rural areas, to great effect.
So to some extent, there's a blurring line of distinction between the medical services and the ambulance emergency services and fire and rescue.
Yeah, I think there is, yeah. I think the ambulance service are being challenged. We talked about fire service calls going down. Ambulance services are the other way and are getting more and more challenging and more busy. And we've got firefighters in those communities who are very capable and able to deal with traumatic situations. I think it's right we bring the two together.
Well, I suppose that's an efficiency of cost that we can discuss in a moment, because there is an issue of the possibility of closer union of all three emergency services, ambulance, fire and rescue service and police. We will discuss that in our final quarter, gentlemen. Please join us again in a couple of minutes. Welcome back, and still with me for the final part of this hot topic in the studio, Deputy Chief Fire Officer of Humberside Fire and Rescue Service, Chris Blaxall, and veteran firefighter Glenn Ramsden, talking about the fire services and possibilities of financing. We were just talking about the what's expected of the modern firefighter, and there is a widening of that responsibility into the medical sphere, and very similar to ambulance people. But there's also talk of an efficiency being available by having the police and crime commissioners, who are responsible for the financing and money decisions about the police force, also taking responsibility for the fire and rescue service. Chris, good idea?
I can't see many financial savings, if I'm brutally honest. The fire authority itself isn't a hugely expensive governance model.
There's a bit of back office savings of scale, I guess.
I think that's a slightly different thing. I think actually we work extremely closely with our colleagues in the police, our colleagues in ambulance service, local authorities and health, actually to share back office where we can. So a good example of that is our workshop facilities. We've merged that completely with the police, so now we've got one workshop that delivers all of our workshop services.
For the maintenance of the vehicles?
Yeah, for the maintenance for fire engines and vehicles and cars. It's all in one place. It's the same group of people who are delivering that service.
But who pays for it then?
Partly Humberside Fire and Rescue Service and partly Humberside Police. But between us, we've made some significant savings there and have got a far better quality of service. So I think the back office things can get done regardless of the governance model. I think we work extremely well together anyway. If the PCC was to take over running of the Fire and Rescue Service, that would continue, I think, and we'd be probably working to the same standards. I think we've got quite a good model now. Clearly, we're an organisation that, certainly in my view, is performing very well. So I don't see it's something that needs to be changed to improve performance. I think we work very well together, and we'll continue to work as well together as we can.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, I think what I would say from certainly from a preventative point of view, what we're finding is we've got a much closer alignment with health, really. So we're finding our people who are really vulnerable from fire tend to be older people, they tend to live alone, they tend to have ambulance issues, medical issues. So we work very closely with the clinical commissioning groups, with public health and the local authorities. We talked about the widening role of firefighters in Hull. Currently we have firefighters responding on a vehicle that doesn't go to fires, they actually attend falls. So they're attending elderly people who've fallen in the home and attending those cardiac cases and things like that as well. So we've got a very widening of the role, and as you're right, some blurring of the edges. But we work very well together with all our partners, and I think that'll continue whatever the governance model is.
Does this seem like a familiar model to you, Glenn, from your 3 decades of experience, that a firefighter is also expected to be something of an ambulance crew, and even, by the sound of it, something of a social worker?
It's a European model that's been going on for years, and American as well. And in our service, we've been round the mess room table, banging out cups of tea saying we should have ambulances on the station. It would make absolute sense, especially when you consider you would be working as one crew. So there's a good chance you know the ambulance crew that's going to turn up at the job you've gone to. And that's got to make working a lot better, operational working a lot better. Also, when you consider the Falls team and these other things that I think are fantastic initiatives, they really are. The ambulance service,
the Falls team.
Yeah. And they're fantastic initiatives that at the moment, because like Chris said, the increase in the ambulance service calls, they can't deal with, and they're getting dealt with properly by the fire service. I'm not saying they didn't get dealt with properly in the past, but they're getting dealt with properly. There's been an increase in the amount of service that firefighters have to do now, so that they're going to be working till they're 60. Well, it's probably a better way to spend the latter days of your operational service on a medical response car, rather than throwing the heavy equipment about you've got to do on the fire engines. So actually that might all line itself up over the years. But as far as having ambulances on station, should have happened years ago.
Well, I was just going to ask that in that sort of the terms of service. In order to get a full pension, a firefighter has to fight fires until they're 60. Now, in the police force, officers, unless they're going to the senior managerial ranks, have no choice but to retire at 50 with a pension, because the reasonable expectation is that you can't really be chasing villains running down the street if you're, get a few grey hairs in your head. Surely the same logic is there for firemen. You don't want people at the age of 59 climbing up ladders with enormous great big hoses.
Well, I suppose that's a situation where we're in with the pension arrangements that changed. Obviously that's a national arrangement, not something I can influence. But certainly we'll have firefighters who join who will be expected to work for 40 years and not retire until they're 60, if they're going to get a full pension. We've got an ageing population of firefighters anyway, because as we've been gradually reducing the number of fire engines over the years, obviously that means we haven't needed to recruit. We're certainly looking forward to doing that in the next couple of years, but certainly we've got an ageing population of firefighters. What I will say about Humberside Fire and Rescue Service is, we recognise this very early. 2006 we started a significant programme of fitness training for firefighters, and actually I'm talking from firefighters up to chief fire officer. All of us are tested every 6 months to pass a pretty stringent cardiovascular test, amongst some other fitness tests as well. That was difficult to introduce at the time because actually some people perhaps don't want to do that. They want to keep fit, maybe don't want to be tested twice a year. But that has become normal now. We've been doing that for 10 years, and we do regularly say we're the fittest fire service in the country. And actually I'll stand by that, because there's nobody who tests their firefighters twice a year to the same level as we do.
Sounds like an edge of competition in that. There's a challenge across the country.
There always is.
Could you give Glenn a fireman's lift down the stairs here?
I could if I needed to, yes.
We might might get our cameras on that a little later, see how that works. Just going to get back to the fact is that the cuts in funding, never welcome, but what are the alternatives? There is going to be a little bit more money coming in from local taxation, as you suggested towards the beginning of the interview, that you broke down in such a way that doesn't cost each household very much per year. But then if you're doing that with the police and every other service that goes onto the council tax, that's still a big jump in council tax. The council tax has gone up 5% in the local areas in Lincolnshire and Yorkshire.
Yeah, and the precept, which is the part of that council tax that effectively pays for the fire and rescue service, is a very small part of that. I may have the figures wrong, but I think it's around about 15 pence a month for a Band D property, so it's not a significant increase.
The fire brigades in this country started in the 18th century and perhaps the 17th century as private insurance organisations, and you can see sometimes in old buildings the metal plate on the side of the building. This building is insured by such and such a fire brigade, such and such a private fire brigade. Presumably, if it's set on fire and it had the wrong sign on the building, the fire rangers would drive past and say no. Yeah. Is there not a certain amount of advantage to returning to a private insurance system of fire brigades? Just as you can insure your health and go to, as well as having the NHS, you can go to private health insurance and go to private doctors and hospitals. Is there not a role for private fire brigades, rather like those ones that they have on the industrial sites, on the docks and in the factories?
I would certainly never like to come back to a position where we could only put a fire out in a property that paid the bill at the start of the month. I think it's right that we're a public service and we deliver that service to all of our community.
Perhaps not necessarily paying a bill at the start of the month in an insurance model then, but paying the bill after you've put out the fire.
There's a number of things we can charge for now, actually. We won't charge, or we can't and wouldn't charge for attending fires, but there's a number of times that businesses will use us for delivering something that will charge them a bill to do that. But I certainly wouldn't want to get to a position where we needed to do that, no. I think the model's right, regardless of the governance model. I think the model of everyone pays what is a reasonable amount of money, I think, in terms of getting their fire and rescue service, and they get a very good service for it.
Glenn, we have to move on from where we are, but if you could start again, what would you do differently?
The problem with being a coastal brigade is you've got to provide fire cover for your seaside resorts, especially in the summer. But that, in Humberside's case, that puts half of that station's fire cover area into the North Sea, because Bridlington, Widensea, Hornsea, some of those you mentioned, and Cleethorpes, are all on the coast, so it is a great big problem. And you could actually probably look at that and refine it. If you had a blank sheet of paper, refine it and put one station more centrally. But there's a huge financial implication to that, as well as the problem, like Chris said, it's going to be a return station. Have you got the people in that area within 5 minutes of the station? So it's great having a blank sheet of paper, but actually the resources are where they are at the moment, and I think most brigades in the country, if not all of them, are stuck with that. And they've just got to do the best with what they can, and the cuts are not helping.
Chris, how about you? Where would you restart, other than just shifting the North Sea?
Shifting the North Sea and zipping the Humber up, I think it would make life easier. No, I think in a strange way, actually, we do that fairly regularly in terms of what you'd look like on a blank sheet of paper. So the changes we've been consulting on recently are not a finger in the air or a professional view. Actually, we have a huge amount of data analysis behind that. So we do look, for example, in Hull, we're moving the fire station in Hull city centre to another area. Huge amount of work gone on in the background to establish exactly what the impact of that will be. So pretty much every year we review that.
Well, at that point, I'll have to stop you both, gentlemen. Thank you very much. That's it for tonight's Hot Topic. Please join the discussion on Twitter using the hashtag Hot Topic. Email your views on Hot Topic to news@estuary.tv. And until next week, goodbye.